Go. Hi, my name's Jessa. This is what burnout is to me. That's good. I'm happy.
Okay. There's so many different ways to go about this, but overall, because of all the things you're involved in and have been involved in, does burnout represent itself differently in different spaces to you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like, there will be some spaces I completely withdraw from, some I just limit exposure to, and then some I will actually pour every remaining ounce I have into despite being in burnout because it gives me that extra little lifeblood in return, right? And a lot of us are like that. A lot of activists are like that. Although you should withdraw to an extent when you have burnout, we know this, right? Like limit our efforts, self care. Um, but but taking yourself out of the fight completely is actually painful. Like it draws on you, and unless you can kind of remove yourself from like reality altogether and pretend like nothing's going on in the world, uh yeah, it's almost impossible to just stop that work. So
It's
yeah.
interesting. You, before we started recording, I told you because it was you, I added some extra personalized
Which
questions, and
scared me, by the way.
you just answered almost all of them
Oh
because
no.
my,
Or should we
well,
wrap?
so I have notes of things that I was expecting you to touch on that we could expand on. And it was, is empathy greater than self-care? Are you able to catch burnout and so on? And the jokes. I put jokes like 10 different times because we all joke for the most part about burnout, but it's, to me, I see it as a coping mechanism because we know it's there. You act specifically in certain ways and make very, try to make calculated decisions on where to put your time and energy when in burnout.
I don't
So
know. I don't know if they're that calculated, Jay. Sorry to cut you off. They're like, because I'm thinking, like, don't give me that much credit. I think you kind of go into survival mode and you, you're like a moth to a flame. Like, it'll hurt you, but you actually sometimes go to those spaces you probably should be withdrawing from. It's really strange because I can withdraw from probably the most helpful, caring comrades and spaces sometimes in burnout. I feel like because I can't mask in front of them as much, I can't, it's just too much, but I can be a little more aggressive in tactics, or I can go up in a different kind of fight. Uh, because I think I can compartmentalize that a little bit differently. It's really strange how it manifests itself, but it's definitely far from calculated.
you had talked about some things you'll pour your last remaining energy or emotion into it, and other things you'll withdraw completely. This is these are things that we talk about as a result of trauma. So burnout, do you feel that burnout is a trauma or a result of trauma? Because knowing how, I know you said it's not necessarily as controlled at the moment you decide, okay, maybe not even in the moment, because I go into things, I'm just going to sit and listen and then I don't shut up. So is it a trauma response? Is it just because a lot of people think of, visualize burnout as like a battery, but it's so much more and so much deeper than just an energy level. So I guess instead of, is it a trauma response as a question, what does burnout mean to you?
It definitely means I stop producing in the levels that I want to, I it means usually means my personal life or my friendships suffer, and the self-care diminishes and the masking maximizes. And but it doesn't necessarily mean from the outside it appears I've slowed down, you know. But there are some real gaps in what should be going on in our, a healthy lifestyle or a sustainable lifestyle, because it has levels like burnout, right? Like you kind of touched on it, like can you catch it? I think you brought up there. And yes, sometimes yes, you can definitely feel yourself getting stretched too thin, and maybe irritable and anxiety overload, like you just got a lot of weight, and you don't let up. So you kind of know you're going into that situation, but a lot of the time it does kind of creep up on you, and you just kind of realize you've withdrawn from a lot of things. Because a bit of, well, I'm neurodivergent, so I have some time blindness as well. So sometimes I'm astonished how time has gone by since I've responded to a text or a request for help. And yeah, then that starts to layer on as guilt. But yeah, like I've had levels of burnout for sure where I've been in the hospital. And then there's levels of burnout that I am still producing content for my show or organizing a lot of folks in multiple spaces, but then literally just like laying out flat in the off time.
The show that Jessa is talking about is Blueprints of Disruption, another Rabble Rousers cooperative show. Out of curiosity, there's a lot of people who aren't at a level of self-awareness to talk on it to this level. You are very self-aware of burnout, a lot of the ways it impacts you, but it doesn't create a preventative mechanism or anything like that. So what with me, I have autoimmune diseases. I can be exhausted, and most people, when you're exhausted, you take a break. But for me, a break doesn't mean I'm going to get any energy back. So that's a lot like burnout. And also, you hit on it. There's family situations that are affected by, but also create burnout. There's social, there's work, there's every aspect of our life. There's both a creation or a contributor to burnout, and then an effect from burnout. And these things, is there a way, like you talk about your mechanism sometimes is to withdraw from things, but we can't withdraw from everything. So how does it affect the different aspects of your life with family or social or work or hobbies? Can you escape burnout of one thing and focus on another space that still creates burnout or contributes to burnout?
Sure. I mean, like family life is turmoil in itself sometimes, but it is a space that you can rejuvenate yourself in. But I think when I'm going through burnout and I don't withdraw from work, I feel strange saying that because like none of it's paid, but activism, and it's not even all activism. So I'm just going to say if I don't withdraw from that work, then my family life is impacted through my coping mechanism. And I think there's nuances too, and not that neurodivergent or autistic people can't get burnout, but there's different versions of burnout and contributing factors in that way. So yeah, it's that's a tough question. Um, The problem
Well,
is, sorry, family is always there, especially like family understands. And they seem to just be a constant, but the work is the demands seem to be greater. You know what I mean? So the pull seems to be there. The urgency often seems to be there. But I'm making it sound like I don't make time for my family. I have a lot of time for my family still. It's just like how mentally you can interact, especially after a day of intense interactions. Because the political realm has a lot of demands in terms of mental load and emotional load. It's very combative, right? And it gets you riled up. You get upset, um, especially folks that have a high empathy level, right? Or a high sense of injustice. Reading the news is difficult, but disengaging from it isn't an option. So, yeah, I know a lot of people just feel that constant pull.
with s- stepping out of the personal perspective to a more societal view, we've normalized burnout. We've labeled it in different spaces like, oh, grinding, or power hour, or whatever words you want to use. Most different settings in a gaming industry, in film industry, and so on. They've normalized it by branding it and implying that hey, it's this thing that's normal and supposed to happen and does happen. Is it the normalization that is a mass coping mechanism, or is burnout just a part of life?
Oh, it's a part of capitalism, right? When we are forced, especially to do things that don't realize our actual human potential, and when we have all of these stressors unnaturally placed on us that make us in survival mode, just mere existence is survival mode. You need to pay bills no matter what. Forget everything else that comes onto your plate in terms of like world injustices or illness in your family or anything. Just mere existing is like just this fight for survival, even though we have created such complex communities that could sustain us all, you know? So it's not a part of natural life. I think it is a part of most people's reality, though. And the big part of normalization, again, it's like the problem is capitalism because it reinforces this, right? Like working 9 till 5. Like I know we had to fight to get those hours, but it is quite unnatural to think that you need to sell your labor for at least 40 hours a week in order to survive in most circumstances. And if you don't, you're punished. So your worth is then placed on that, and it's a bragging right. And I think we're starting to move away from that, just the fact that burnout now has a name, and before it was just kind of like, motherhood was expected to you just be frazzled and tired all the time. That's normal, right? And all these other things that the system does help us reinforce that normalization. I wouldn't take that too much on us, but you talk about joking, it's like that's definitely a coping mechanism because you can't stop. The world doesn't let you stop. You can't. Like if you had all the money in the world and I could go to a spa and just mentally check out for a few weeks, like sure, I could buy some time back, but you still then dive right back in to the same old slog. That's designed to burn people out, really.
So much so that anyone who's taken part in any kind of campaign, which you've taken part in many campaigns, the things that you put off, when you come back, you don't start back from where you put it off. There's been a week, a month, couple months of extra stuff you have to catch up on before you can start back. So even taking that break, which is a perfect segue into the next question I had, is when we try and escape, there is a lot of people that I have talk to about burnout, there's a fear of stopping. For me, I have always overwhelmed myself because I don't want to stop and sit there and reflect, because then it's holy shit,
Mm-hmm.
look how overwhelmed I am. So when it's normalized in so many different aspects, you talked about the view of motherhood. It was supposed to, or it was normal to always be exhausted and so on. And if there was any resistance to that, for a long time, it was diagnosed as hysteria. Like, why wouldn't you want to? That's so normal that you not wanting that is not okay. It must be a medical condition. So we've done a lot of breaking down of things like anxiety and trauma, and stress is understood more on the chemical reactions and so on. So is it more so now, instead of being a simple fact of life, is it weaponized? So if you're in a political space, is burnout weaponized? In work, it's it seems so detrimental to everywhere it exists, but it exists everywhere. So is it weaponized? Have you found it weaponized where we can joke and dismiss burnout, but our opponents, I'll say opponents just as like a catch-all, are they purposely trying to burn us out in these different spaces? Are CEOs or upper management trying to burn out the workers? Are politicians and political parties trying to burn out the electorate and members and so on?
Yeah. Yeah, like short answer is yes. And always when we're talking about like our opponents, it's we're talking about capitalists and those that facilitate them, right? So um they want us divided and tired. And that's why it's hard to mobilize folks a lot of the time. You'll see our voting numbers diminish as life gets harder. We disengage. We don't have time to pay attention quite often. This is what we already live and breathe. But if you are working and parenting and maybe caregiving and, you know, all those other extracurricular things that you deserve to do, there's no time to keep on top of politics and pay attention to what the powerful are doing. And we're too tired to fight back for the most part, and confused and burnt out. So, in that way, it's weaponized in the same way, capitalism is. But I don't think like on that smaller scale, like when you say political parties, like my experience within the NDP is more that they're perfectly aware of the impacts of burnout because they're human beings and they have done campaigns, which is just continuous work for X amount of days, on top of real life. And they don't accommodate it for it, right? They don't make any plans to prevent it. They don't include self-care time or like, and most people don't. So it's not like a specific slight to any political party, but just that in general, even though we're aware of it and even though we're progressive and we're supposed to be taking care of one another, I think most places do a really poor job of going beyond recognizing it. It's like those land acknowledgements. We acknowledge you're all burnt out, but here's a list of things that we need to be done by midnight tonight. So
It's I love how you just represented that, because we'll talk about the political space within a party. It is at the core of it, there's a fundraising mechanism that must continuously present this urgency and this threat that we must call bank, we must donate now, we must do this and do this. And it's a perpetual state of it's never enough. So then when you reach a point where you need to say take a break, you are then not up to date on that forced continuous stressor. So you take a break, other people start focusing together, other people start working together, and you there's the fear of being like boxed out or left behind. So is that not the weaponization of burnout, where get people to a point where if they do stop, then you're excluded, you're behind, you're not rewarded, you're not a part of it, because this is something that's very normal in politics, but it's not normal to me that that is a thing that is viewed as normal in politics.
I guess that thought doesn't actually, of all the thousands of thoughts that go through my mind at any moment, and that's not one of my worries when I step back. My worry 100% is just that there's just already not enough being done, that we're running out of time. Like, even talking about it, I will cry. Fuck. I've
Do you
known
want to
from a
take a
very
minute?
young age. No, no. I've known from a very young age that, like, there's work to be done. There's injustice, and that's not right. And you can't just sit back. And if people need your help, you need to help them. If you have any capacity, you need to help them. I would love to be boxed out of some things, because honestly, all what pulls me back into, I said 100%, so I guess I lied. Just forget that part. But it's also the expectations put on me. As my profile grew a little bit. Like, I hate even saying that, it sounds so smug, but like, so many people reach out to me daily still, and I've withdrawn from the party so much, and I'm not slighting anyone who has reached out to me, and I know I haven't responded to quite a lot of you. Um that look to me to, like, solve it. Like, fix the party or start a new one or unite the left. And that's an incredible weight. And these are all really great people, and I don't want to let them down. And you only live one life, right? Like, we talk about making marks that will last an eternity, right? Like lighting flames that will help eventually spark that revolution if it's not in our lifetime. And that work is just, it's got to be tireless, and that sucks. But that's my reality, and that's okay, because there's incredible trade-off as well.
This kind of circles back quite early into this conversation, where it was unspecified, but you had brought it up. So empathy is greater than self-care in everyone that I know who is empathetic. So why are we, and this is such a huge question, why are we so willing to do everything to fight things while sacrificing ourselves, understanding that the destruction of someone else is horrible and we will destroy ourselves to try and fight that? Also, I'm going to hit mute and I'm going to walk away for a second, but you answer your question.
I forgot the question because all I can think about is you walking away. So you have to ask it again if you can hear me. Oh, empathy. Empathy, self-care. Okay, I have an answer, Santiago. I'm gonna say it. I think the easiest answer for me there is we're human. I think that is human nature. A lot of people would say it's human nature to be competitive. but it's actually to be incredibly cooperative. And that's how we survive in a society. I mean, not to the point where you're like throwing yourself on grenades, but to an extent that is part of being human. And knowing the impact it has on me, hopefully my output is greater, right? That I help more people than I harm. Hopefully that's one. And like capital. So, I don't know. I think I'm not like advocating for burnout because we need good people to stay healthy and to be able to fight in a healthy, sustainable way. But we are also at an incredibly pivotal moment in political times where we are losing ground to something that is deadly. Like there's no mincing words now, right? It's there is fascism on the rise, and it was always the left's duty to make sure that that did not happen. And we are failing. And so even now that work is even more important. So I would love, like, I hope through your discussions, because I've not really discovered a lot of coping mechanisms or ways to like prioritize yourself over the greater good. But I'm not sure we're supposed to, right? Because I rail against individualism. It's what's destroying our society, right? We are communal creatures. And sometimes that requires, like any mother will tell you, even the act of pregnancy and breastfeeding is a bit of self-sacrifice for a greater good, right? It is built into our humanity. This is how most animals survive in this way. So the fact that it's seen as like a personal flaw, not by you, right? Um, is another product of our system. Because if we had the time, we could take care of our community, no problem. Right? If we actually utilized the resources that we had and lived the lives that we could live fairly and equitably, we could have the time to take care of ourselves and our neighbors, our children, and the world. You know what I mean? Like, we wouldn't have to do it on this shoestring budget of energy that we have left over. So I won't let the
You,
system win.
well, you hit on something that has really pissed me off
Uh-oh.
that I can't figure out. Not you pissed me off, but just that it exists
That
pissed me
happens.
off. In most of our communities, on Facebook, I'm a part of a group called Buy Nothing. It's people who don't want to throw things out and want to see if other members of the community want it. And then there'll be someone who posts there was a house fire. And then the community will come together, and the community came together for me and basically furnished my apartment when I had some issues going on when I first moved in, that I couldn't get my stuff here. That challenged my custody of my daughter because I didn't have a bed for her. So the community came together, and I intended to try and locate just a bed for that first night, but I had people come together to create like almost a fully furnished apartment. We will do that. It is something that it doesn't necessarily matter what the Facebook post or the call for help is. People are normally, even people who aren't wealthy or even comfortable, people will sacrifice to help others. But then you go up a level to like municipal politics. We don't come together. Provincial politics, we're even more divided. Federal, we're so you talked about it being a part of, I want to say it is at the core of humanity to come together. But then at the same time in society we've normalized so many things that are the stark contradiction of these things. So we you talked about breastfeeding. There's so most of my life I have seen so much of this, like, not villainizing it, but ooh, that's gross, or don't do that in public, and so on. And it doesn't make sense, because this is this is just part of being human, being a species. This is There are people who cannot breastfeed, but it is intended to be. That's why these things exist. And there's this whole idea of, oh, here's where you can do that, here's where it's acceptable to do that, as if to say, here's where it's acceptable to keep your child alive. So how do we most of us fight the effect of things. How do we start normalizing the opposite of what is normalized? Some people will say move the Overton window, some people will say smarten the fuck up. Like, how do we change from it being okay to spend most of your life working to afford a place you spend little time in to feed and take care of a family you get to spend little time with? Like, it's really messed up how we live as a species, but it's so normalized that they try and project these core human functions as being weird or wrong or ugly.
I think in general, we've really been separated from what it means to be human. Because when you get into political arguments and, healthy ones that you're allowed to have discourse and you really get it boiled down, it often comes to a disagreement on what human nature is, right? Whether it is to be competitive or cooperative, or whether it's, are we inherently bad and need to be controlled? Or are we inherently good, and could flourish if let to do so? And again, that is by design. And it's been so long, and it's been so many generations, if ever, right? It's not like before capitalism, people weren't struggling either, right? We've yet to realize full human emancipation. And that is Karl Marx talking there. For all those folks who want to label me a commie, I am. But it's true. If you are able to read Marx, or even just step back and think of any kind of living being and the idea of selling that being's abilities so they can eat, right? That doesn't exist anywhere else in the animal world, right? That is a design by humans to exist in that kind of survival mode no matter what. And that's definitely not necessary at all. So, but it's been generations of this being reinforced, that this is normal, that this is what good people do, this is what bad people do. If you don't work, you're not worthy of anything. Like, even the idea of what work is and what contributing to your community is has been so warped, right? By design, so that you do need to compete in that capital market, or you will be ostracized, removed, forced into poverty, or euthanized. Now, so it's, how do you get people to realize what I believe human nature truly is probably a lot of hard discussions. And it makes a good argument for universal basic income. And I know you don't want to get political in so much, but if you just allowed people to free up some of their time, or some of that stressor of having to constantly be at work. So I hate to get into Marxist theory or anything, but just think about what you would do with your body all day long for 8 hours a day. Is that you realizing, is that you realizing what your capacity is, what your true potential is? absolutely cannot be. Like for some people, they might be in a profession where that allows them to do it. For the most part, it's just grind. It's mundane. It's repetitive. It's not challenging to like the extent that folks can actually contribute. It's often in areas that you know aren't actually contributing to society, right? Like I worked at a place on University Avenue in a decently paid position, but I absolutely knew that the work and the time I spent away from my family and all that effort was actually just making capital more money. And I understood that, so it sucked my soul. It made me sick to my stomach every Monday morning when I had to go to work. It was a toxic workplace too, but that's besides the point. I just knew I was not doing what I was meant to do. I knew it. And it's tough once you realize that. It's kind of easier to be in the matrix and thinking this is normal and this is this is how humans have always been and it's how humans always will be. But yeah, it's lost human potential for sure that keeps us in this burnout.
The thing I hate the most that is enraging and defeating at the same time is it is what it is. And that seems kind of like I talk to people about how we gaslight our children just like our parents gaslit us and their parent, but people don't ever want to accept that reality because it's associating some kind of blame and not you are a victim of something. And then if you only know that, then you are unintentionally going to do the same thing. So for instance, when we talk about what you talked about, work contributing to capital in times of the greatest advancements in science, in math, in art, in music, and so on, before innovation was owned by corporations and it was able to be an individual who was funded by whatever source of funding to pursue their passion, and that's all they had to worry about. So some of the great artists who were funded by the state or by a university or by wealthy people to focus on that craft while they were creating that song or that orchestra, I don't remember what to call it, symphony, or that artwork, while they were doing it, they weren't considered to be contributing. It was only at the end result for that, here's that quick microsecond societal reward, thank you for creating this, but the effect of it could be a new medium, a new way of presenting a completely different take on something that has just been the way it is. But that kind of thing has been wholly choked out. Innovation's been taken from people. So when you talk about this is me responding to the UBI, is when you allow people the opportunity to pursue what they love or what drives them, or to have the option to say, you know what, this isn't my jam, I want to change. It creates innovation on mass scale. So is that the biggest proponent to why we don't, is capitalism wants to own innovation, so we accept, well, you shouldn't have time to have a hobby, to do a thing you like to do, and so on. For you, do you think that, because we're talking individual acts of, say, a painter painting, but then the impact can be societal, like change, create, innovate. So is it fostering a bit more of the it's okay to be individual if we're not doing it in a way that's destructive?
For sure, because it doesn't even have to result in anything like innovative. We have to recognize that like self-growth is a collective gain, right? When each person does better, we are collectively then better. But that doesn't really work with capitalism. And, I feel like I don't want to get into a theory discussion again, but it does require a level of people that are unemployable, that are desperate for a job, or at least sit there to demonstrate that at least that's not us. So even the
Mhm.
working poor can be like, well, at least I'm not on ODSP, right? Like, that is necessary in order to starve us for the lowest wages possible and all these other things, right? So it doesn't value the kind of self growth that we deserve. So it definitely doesn't like value the liberal arts or the creative arts, uh, even though those are incredible contributions to our communities. We know this. We know vibrant communities are full of creative individuals, right? Making it more beautiful and whatnot. But that, that is a commodity. I mean, you can commodify anything at this point, I'm pretty sure. But in general, it's not valued. So any time you take to do that self-care, that self-growth is not valued. It's not paid in any way. And it's often seen as extra. Um, the fact that like even self-care has a name is kind of strange. We should just be taking care of ourselves and then those around us, right? Like just naturally. But we often are so stuck in the grind of the machine, making money for capital, that we actually forget we need to take care of ourselves. And the only reason they would ever even remind us to do that is so that we can keep working in the machine. So, yeah, it's a bit of a slog, but whatever comes out of your growth, right? You are then a bigger contributor to the people around you, and that has value.
It's best exemplified by our education system,
Yeah.
where if everyone had access to education, whatever path they take, the knowledge they are gaining and then returning into society, that's an investment as a whole, but it's not viewed as that. And it's so bizarre because we individualize the things we shouldn't, and we on a social level do things that we shouldn't. It like we do the opposite of how we should act. So I wanna take a quick focus on a very you specific answer. I've hit on it quite a few times, and we just kind of went into a deep dive of hobbies or self care. Is there anything you do that you're able to enjoy? So, not something you do as part of like a routine, but something you're able to stop and focus and enjoy, such as art or creation of music or any kind of thing like that. What is your escape from it all for a little bit?
Well, I'll be perfectly honest. My right now, my son downloaded Minecraft and he doesn't know how to use it yet. So I sometimes do. I said it before. Sometimes I just dive into video games as an escape. But when but that's like an unhealthy kind of level. When I'm actually feeling good and I'm able to realize my, humanity, express my humanity, I like to paint and I love to get my hands dirty in gardening. I love, I grow some food, but I love to grow flowers and pretty things and smelly things and things that just keep growing and winding around stuff. I find really real joy in watching things grow like that. So the winter is hard on me. I do have some house plants and I keep telling someone, if you see one at the grocery store, please bring it home. I'm lacking in that green space right now, but I did get actually my fingers dirty with some paint this morning with my little one. So yeah, I have been able to find things, it sounds so cliche, but long walks. I live near a lake and I find seeing water, a large body of water, very soothing. I feel like we were all meant to live near the water where you can like hear it and see it. Um, and if I go for a little bit of a drive, I can go see a lake and I find that very cleansing. I sound like such a hippie. Um, but yeah, there are some things, and sometimes I need to remind myself what they are, or just like make time. It's hard when you're a mom. You prioritize the needs of your kids too in that spare time, but luckily they like to do some of the things that I like to do too.
I recently experienced the first ever school activity for my daughter, and I had to get through a lot of levels of personal challenges to take part in that. But when she looked up while she was doing it was singing uh, Christmas songs at school. When she looked up and she saw me there, that it wasn't the act of going, it wasn't the act of singing, it wasn't any of that. The thing that was unbelievably rewarding is her looking up at me, seeing me there, and seeing the look on her face at seeing me there. That moment right there was worth all the all the hurdles I had to climb in order to go take part. And it's funny because for me, I try and focus on, and I'm so interested to ask people this. I've lined up artists to ask how burnout impacts their life, because as an artist, if you don't produce, you're in trouble. And
Both financially and emotionally.
yes, but for other, I want to ask, when you are burnt out, does that mean you stop, say, painting, or does it change the painting you're doing and so on? So I'm looking forward to that. But for me, I don't have hobbies. Playing with my daughter is my hobby. I don't, even though I'm doing a podcast on burnout, which focuses on self-care, I'm a horrible hypocrite because I have, other than spending time with my daughter, if she is not here, I am on pause. So it's interesting to me how you talk about going for a simple drive to the lake, but all the things that have to happen for that to be accessible to you. If you're not working, you can't maybe afford the car or gas or insurance, whatever. If like there's just, I'm not going to start hypothetically going through all the reasons or barriers that you might not be able to, but you find comfort and joy out of a quick drive to a lake. But how rare is that?
I don't even get to do it that often, so it's very rare for almost everybody. And like even the act of painting is a privilege. Like it's requires funds, right? And I'll be honest, like when I'm burnt out, I feel like my creativity's just gone anyway. But that's difficult because almost all hobbies have a cost involved, or other kinds of barriers. But we got to find you something. Like, I feel like I want, like, is there something that you love to do that you just cannot? Or have you just not found that something that brings you peace for a moment or
So first
rejuvenates
off,
you, you know?
you just switched into host mode,
Sorry.
but no,
It was
it's,
inevitable.
it's perfectly fine. But I don't live vicariously through my daughter. The things we are doing, so I focus a lot on STEM activities. The things we are doing are things I enjoy doing.
But
So,
when she's not with you, you say you're on pause. That is half your
uh-huh,
life now. So
that is something that, okay, so
maybe
full
like
on
Bill Nye, the science guy on the side.
thank you for throwing this in my face like this, because I got her, she has been watching these, I think it's called ASRM, where it's marble videos, and the sounds and the visuals of these videos are like soothing to, no, I don't know if it's soothing, but the second that video starts, I would have to basically unplug the TV and throw it outside to get her to break her concentration on these videos. It just takes her to a place. And as a result, I was able to get her a kit, like a marble kit, like the videos. And we're playing with them, and I am having fun playing with them. She is having fun playing with them. I will not sit there. I was thinking about it this morning. I will not pull that box out and play with those things, even though it is it is a great way to completely break from the routine of thinking about the troubles of the day. And I'm going to actively, after this, I'm going to actively go and pull that box out just to try. But I know it's only going to last a few seconds before it's because this is why I want to do this series or this show is the the depth of the depth the level of hypocrite that I will go in this whole series is something that I'm fully aware of, but I'm still going to do it. Like, I'm sitting here asking you, what
This
things
is
do
Jay's
you
therapy
do?
sessions too, right?
Well, this is something that I've tried to understand this, and maybe for you, you don't maybe realize it, but what we're doing right now, you host a podcast. Yes, there's a lot of work that goes into it, but you are creating something. You are creating content. You are having conversations. You are talking about things and contributing to society because someone listens to that episode and then goes and is more informed, or it does leave an impact, but we don't view it as that.
We better.
You even had a visual representation when I
Yeah.
said, and it impacts society. There was kind of a, well, hopefully it does kind of look, but just in the act of creating this thing that didn't exist before, that is beautiful. But is it making enough money? Are we going to be able to find a guest? Do we have enough time? Do we this? All of the stressors of it make it, we've almost taken something we're doing as therapy or as a joy, a hobby.
It is. I don't find the podcast work at all. Like, even when I'm tediously like editing some videos and whatnot, I do it with a huge grin on my face. It's hilarious. Um yeah, maybe it is therapy. So maybe I've found like an outlet because even when it's hard, even when I don't have a guest, sometimes like, it's a Thursday drop and it's Wednesday and I've just withdrawn. I've just been burnt out and I've not pulled my weight. Um I'm not like anxious about it the way that like school would make me like deadlines in that way. I'm not a student anymore, but oh my god, school burnt me out. That was when I was in the hospital. But this is like just pure joy. Um and a lot of people challenge me on, when are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? Like the stuff that I used to do, like a little more of your typical organizing and, shit disturbing within the NDP. And I'm really kind of not missing that at the moment. I feel like I have found what comes easy to me at the moment. And hopefully, I build my skills and I am contributing in a positive way. But that's how it feels to me, and for now that's fucking good enough, right? Like, I feel good about it. The work I did inside the NDP wasn't rewarding in that the results weren't there. The output was just usually not, I don't know what even the output was. It was just always fighting, like just fighting to be heard and seen. And that work just had, almost zero payback except for the comrades made and the lessons learned. But, they say he's like, it's not work if you find something that you love, and it pays, but it doesn't. But that's okay for now.
You talked earlier about how even painting is a privilege because the supplies.
Sure, yeah.
And there are so many in the disabled community. This is something that if you do anything, well, why don't you put all this extra effort that you can't because it takes so much other to commodify that and make money? Why don't you, oh, if you can type on Twitter, you can do typing as a job, and all of those types of reactions, they're very stark. They're normalized when it's towards the disabled community, but it's such a stark example of how we can, for the most part, point to that situation of here is this mountain of barriers for this person to do that, though just to create it, let alone the act of selling and creating an entire business around like a dollar store supplied painting that people aren't going to spend millions of dollars on. Hopefully someone does get to that level, but there's this realization of how messed up that actually is. Well, hopefully there's a realization, but then this person who can look at that and go, wow, that's kind of messed up to say, oh, if you can type, you can work. It's totally ignorant of all the issues in that person's life that would have to overcome. But then they accept it of themselves and others doing it to them as they go punch in for the day, grinding away. So this is why I found burnout to be the topic I really wanted to talk about, because we've normalized it in so many places but still recognize it bad in other places and then go into denial of how it is affecting like it's such a hot mess to me. But you said we're at a place politically, a dire place politically for most of human existence, and this is me just talking from personal view, most of human existence, there's been very minimalized threats to either individuals or groups. It's never been a global threat. And then climate. Like, climate is not something I don't understand the concept of climate denying, because it is bad. And if it is on a cycle and we've sped that, so whatever impact we have had, you cannot say that clear cutting almost every tree on this planet is having a bad effect. But even though we understand the horrible effects of what we have been doing, we as a species, for a very long time, being at a place where we have the knowledge and the tools and the resources to fully kind of understand, it is so far below individual, societal, political, capital interest. So that is the normalization that when I say it's if you start doing something, vegans are mocked, and anyone who does that something for the most part to combat there's a mocking of them or a stigma or something created, when like that's what we should all be finding that way as a society to like combat this. But because it's normalized in every other aspect, it's not hard to convince groups of people, well, this is normal, or how weird is it that you're talking about changing this system and the way it is. And I know there's not a question, but your thoughts on that.
Well, I think like one thing you said there that really I wanted to maybe challenge you on is the idea that we have the tools and the resources. They exist, but we don't collectively own them, or have access to them. And people find that incredibly frustrating because they do feel like we do have the tools and resources and, science and
I was saying the tools and resources to understand that, like, we are fucking the planet up. Not to stop it, but that we are fucking the planet up.
okay, okay. So I don't know. I'm kind of taking a turn there on my answer. Um,
I did kind of present it as a way that we have the tools and resources to change it, But what I meant is we have the tools and resources to understand that like it is an issue. It's not a myth. It's not a Hollywood narrative.
Yeah, like climate deniers, I hope are, well, I don't know. It's sketchy. Like the folks that just don't buy into stuff. We touched on it on an episode I just recorded, but like the distrust of government plays a lot into that, I think, on why people maybe aren't all convinced on how bad it is. And that's a healthy distrust of government. However, it's not suiting us very well at this point. But the idea, the fact that there's such pressure put on the individual to make certain changes, like you and I kind of got into that a little bit this week. Collective responsibility and then like individual responsibility. And yes, we all have our part. And if we all played that same part, it would have a massive impact. But at the same time, it would still not be enough without resistance and revolt, right? We absolutely, capital will never allow us to make the impact that we need to do as individuals working by ourselves, or even in these great community networks that a lot of people are creating. That isn't going to be enough, even if all of your town went vegan. And there's issues with vegans and green impact and stuff like that. But that's a weight that we bear, that they make us bear, right? That, like, recycle, yes, recycle, still recycle, but like that's not the problem. You sorting your recycling is not the problem.
It
Capitals,
all goes to the same dump anyway.
and
We
that's what a
found
lot of
that out
people
in
say.
the
Yeah, like it's capital. Capital's the problem. You gotta punch up. But we often feel like it's on us because it has been. The folks that should lead us into battle against this collective threat aren't. And individualism is reinforced constantly. So that goes with take care of yourself and only yourself. But yeah, like climate anxiety is such a huge reality for a lot of folks. And I don't want to sound like I don't care about climate justice. I don't actually experience that anxiety. When I say the clock is ticking, I mean against the rise of the right and all of the other things that will come with that and that are already coming with that. Right now, trans people and those that are unhoused and disabled right now are essentially being erased, right? We are seeing a rise of fascism, but climate anxiety is a real reality, especially folks that are like maybe a decade or two younger than me. And they feel that constant pressure, fully aware of what the problem is, fully aware of the consequences of not doing anything. And that's going to be an incredible, like, I hope you can get some climate justice activists on here to talk about that, because when you hear it from them, it's like this incredible internal pressure that they feel on top of all of the other pressures that we naturally feel. And thankfully, that's something that I am working on, but it just does not hit me in that way. I don't know why, but it is a lot of people's reality.
So, think that you've led this to a great place to potentially end it with a question, and it's going to be probably the hardest one.
Uh-oh.
We've identified and talked about like personal impacts and causes and so on, and we've identified more systemic ways. You go into a space, a conversation or a group or a meeting or whatever, fully understanding a lot of the things that this person may not be aware of or may be fully aware of, like burnout, like the mental and physical impact of every aspect of their life, and then they turn around and dismiss something that either you or the group or whatever is saying. They take an opposition to social justice issue or the way people are talking about going about it, and then it becomes a conflict of, here are a group of people who come together to fight this social injustice. We can just say a specific, even though the intersectionality means you can't talk about one without the other. But for this case, there's someone who, however they have come about it, it is what it is, and everyone else who is saying no, it shouldn't be. How do you do that in a trauma informed way where this person, like, obviously our instinct is let's either kick them out of that space, remove them, or attack them, or anything. How do we start communicating in a way that is effective, but it isn't. Education doesn't lead to action. It can't just be tell people this is what's happening, because then you get into the chicken little, the sky is falling, and it becomes pointing it out and educating is the weird thing, or the people who are acting individually or as groups or whatever, that can be viewed as ineffective or weird because you're not doing something that society deems as normal. Like, we understand these things, and then we encounter someone who doesn't. How do we go about this in a way to go, hey, you are a victim of this thing? Because if you talk to a CEO, obviously this changes. But if you're talking to someone who's talking about, oh yeah, you just got to grind and lift yourself up by the bootstraps and all these things to perpetuate the concept that being in a from birth to death burnout is just the way it is. How do we have these healthy conversations? How do we normalize? Basically, how do I make my show better and effective the way I want it to be, where we normalize not only talking about burnout, but the fact that it is not okay. It's not natural. It's not healthy. It's not normal. So how do we solve all the problems of the world, Jessa?
Well, I think like self-realization goes a long way too. So when you're communicating to folks, try not to slip into that like bragging about how busy you are, as though that's clout. We also fall into the trap of asking new people, what do you do? Meaning, like, what is their job? What are they paid to do? And it's like, I'm not telling people to change these two phrases that they have in their conversations, but more the mentality that comes with it. So, like, value the art your friends create, buy it. See value in the contributions not normally celebrated. We often celebrate caregivers as though the folks they're caring for aren't also contributing to that relationship in any way, in any meaningful way, that knowledge sharing in itself or storytelling or any kind of creative art isn't actually contributions. Because, and you will encounter those people. We encounter those people daily. And they're trapped. They know it. They feel that it's not normal. They're just doing the same thing. So, like, empathy just goes a long way too, It's hard, but I hope you find more answers than I'm able to provide. So, yeah, it's a struggle for me too sometimes, even with my own contributions to anything, motherhood, the output I have into the world, and whether that is enough. So I think we're really hard on ourselves. One thing that did help me, and the fight becomes a little easier when you do have kids, or you have access to a younger generation, is that that your impact on them is generational. It will live on more so than your individual work, right? But that's by yourself or with just kind of the natural kind of grind of things. And so knowing that you might not even be seeing all of the results of the contributions that you make is important, so that you feel satisfied, so you don't push yourself so much. So I'm kind of talking to myself here a little bit too. always trying to get like that more reach. Like for me, I have a podcast and social media where I try to reach people. So it's like trying to get more reach, more reach, more reach. But if you reach one person and they have 20 conversations, or they go on to join an action, and you just don't know, right? Like you just don't, you have to be satisfied in knowing that you will never see the full impact of your contributions, but believe that they are exponential. Maybe that'll allow folks to rest a little bit.
At the first, I'll say half of my life, I used to hear the saying, those who fight for change don't normally live to see the change.
That's
And I used to view that as like a deterrent, like why
hmm.
fucking bother? But then not even the second half, but not that far in the past, I heard it at the right time in the right context where it's like, oh, okay, so I am providing the stepping stones, like trailblazing, whatever words you use to represent that. And a lot of people don't realize how, for me, I see my daughter, I told my daughter that hugging trees helps them grow. So she literally is a tree hugger because any tree she sees, she wants to help it grow and she'll hug it, which makes walks very long, but still quite rewarding. And then there's this guilt of, I have to do everything to ensure that there's trees in her future. And I realized that that kind of narrative of the catastrophizing versus the minimalizing of things, that to me is kind of like the left or the right, or however you want to say it, where I have so many people who are willing to do this, and I have a feeling a lot of the things we're going to talk about are going to be the same, but very, very different. And to try and compress that, or to have a panel and have all these people go, hey, you said this about this, you said this about this. The instinct is, well, how do we then package that to other people as if it to solve their burnout or prevent them from burnout? But then that puts so much pressure on doing this show and asking the right questions. So in your parting, thank you very much for doing this.
Oh, my
But
pleasure.
in your parting goodbye, you can name drop the things like blueprints and so on. But if you were telling, and I'm so sorry to spring this on you, if you were telling your younger self something
Oh no.
about burnout, what would it be?
You're probably autistic. I went, I went a long time having no idea why I felt certain ways and why I would hit walls. And for folks out there that have that overwhelming empathy that overrules all, I mean, take a look. It's possible. But honestly, that would have been probably the most, because when you said your younger self, my first thought was, okay, what advice? That's what he's going to ask me, right? Because I'm always trying to think ahead. But what advice would you give your younger self? Just done. Not about burnout, even though that's what we're talking about. And I would have been like, get in the fight earlier. That's what my advice. That was my answer. Get in the fight earlier, harder, and don't let up. Like not even for a second. So I guess I learned nothing from this episode at all, Jay. I hope someone did. Maybe as I sit back and reflect. But like you've said it a few times, like I'm fully self-aware of burnout and its impact, but seemingly unwilling to do anything about it. Just except fight harder and maybe it'll go away. Maybe I wasn't
Well,
your
any
best first
other
guest. Well, if folks want to help bolster my spirits and my energy, I would appreciate if they could check out my podcast. It's our podcast. It's part of Rabble Rouser's production. And it's called Blueprints of Disruption. And really, it's just dedicated to all the folks out there that are just fighting that good fight, no matter what, constantly wanting to share lessons with each other. So, kind of like what Jay's doing here. Yeah. So I that does, every time I get a, like a new audience member or a follow there of another activist or organizer, I get I get a little bit excited. So
Well, this has been Burnout with Jessa McLean. Thank you very much for listening or watching.